Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the part 2 of the Dynamic Approach to Market Access webinar from Alliance. My name is Mohan Purushothaman, and I head up the Pricing and Market Access practice within Alliance. We will be going right into the presentation right now. At this point, just wanted to briefly go over the agenda that we are trying to cover today. This is the second part of the webinar series that we initiated, so we will be spending some time to recap some of the key takeaways from last week's webinar. And once we do that, our plan is to go into understanding the dynamics in global price management and spend some time understanding what are some of those operational challenges, and then getting into some of the broader topics around how do we make these complex decisions when there is a very high level of uncertainty and complexity in this marketplace. Then we like to then, after that, go into some specifics around two key areas. One is in the early launch phase, how do we do launch planning, particularly with reference to how do you optimize launch sequencing. And then after that, we will get into more inline price management issues, particularly focusing on reference pricing and how does some of the operational price management issues, how do they affect your overall strategy, and from an operational perspective, what is it that you can do to optimize those decisions. And very briefly at the end of it, we will talk a little bit about our solution that is an integrated, comprehensive approach to lifecycle global price management. So we can go to the next slide. So going back to our meeting, the last webinar that we had, we did talk about some of the key success factors that you need to be looking for when facing up to the operational challenges in global price management. Clearly, I think all of you will be able to relate to this. Proactive planning is key to whatever we do in this space. The marketplace, dynamics of the marketplace, they're changing so quickly, and being able to plan that proactively is a key factor there. Now, in order to do that, there's always been debate about do we do a top to bottom, bottom to top kind of a planning process. At the end of it, it has to be an open and frequent communication, and it has to be a collaborative process. The complexity at a regional level today or at an affiliate level today has become so much that it's virtually impossible for someone sitting at headquarters to decide what's your best strategy. It has to be a very, very collaborative effort. Once you go past that, you got to really be dealing with, how do you set your goals? What kind of metrics do you want to follow? There's obviously not one solution that says it to you. There are multiple options. So you got to be focused on what are the metrics that are of importance to you, to your company, to the product's longer-term goals that you're trying to accomplish. So those become very critical factors as well. And then, of course, we come into the analytical component. Now, these complex, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go through this presentation. The complexities in this marketplace are gotten to a level where unless you have the discipline of breaking these complex problems into manageable modules and then being able to deal with them, and then from those components build up a more holistic strategy. If you're not able to do that, it becomes extremely difficult to comprehend this level of complexity. And we will talk through some of those, how a scenario-based approach to this can be really useful in addressing this. These strategies and these operational details are not set in stone. They keep changing, and we have to have mechanisms in place to constantly keep track of what's happening. How do we tweak our strategies? How do we change course in terms of tactical implementation? So those are things that need to work side by side with your overall strategy all along. Now, when you look at some of these are obviously, you're not able to kind of do this unless you're able to look around and see what's happening elsewhere. How do we benchmark this to, to other critical, factors that are out in the environment? What other companies are doing from a competitive perspective? So those are things that need to inform your decisions in a big way as well. So just to kind of sum up this is the strategy tactical continuum is something that needs to play together in a very harmonious fashion. And unless you have an approach that tackles all of these, apparently some of these are somewhat conflicting when you start to look at it, but there is a balance, and that's what really makes a successful strategy for a product. We can go to the next slide. Now, we talked about the need to look at some of these complexities that happen today, and maybe looking at some of the more immediate changes that are happening. But when you look at a product and decide on some of these seemingly small, price change decisions, let's say, to give you an example, the reality is that impact of some of these go over time to the entire life cycle of the product. And that is becoming more critical these days. And when you think about how these price, what you're seeing here is a life cycle curve that if you were to think of this as a price curve, it might be something that's realistic within the U.S. market, but it is probably not anywhere close to reality when you look at the European markets, for example. Now the question is, whatever shape that life cycle curve looks like, what you do today will have a somewhat intense impact over its course of the life cycle. Now today's some of the things we're going to talk about in today's session, particularly reference pricing impact. These are areas where some of that longer-term impact can be modeled, and we can get a better sense of what impact a decision today will have over the course of the next 24 months, 36 months. We will talk a little bit through that, but I'm in no way suggesting that is all of the changes that we can model here. There's obviously a lot more factors that affect those decisions. So with that, we can go to the next slide. Now, with all this complexity and all this variability that's out there in the marketplace, oftentimes we are all forced to take decisions under conditions of uncertainty. Now, whether we look at the classical kind of issues that we face in marketing, like competitors' pricing actions, competitors' positioning, to some of the policy changes that might happen. There's obviously uncertainties around those. Those have been obviously addressed in many studies. Many approaches have been evolved to address those in some way. But what we are also now talking about is, from an operational perspective, there are a lot of uncertainties as well. When you look at specifically, when you look at reference pricing, or when you're thinking in terms of coming up with a launch sequence for your product, you cannot model those under conditions of certainty. So that's really the point I'm trying to make. You have reference rules, but these rules could be formal rules, they could be informal rules. You could have a different set of rules that are applied when a product is launched, and then going forward, the re-referencing rules could be very different. So there's that variation. We oftentimes do not know the exact date on which a price referencing will take place. So there's all those kinds of issues that make decision-making difficult. So you could, just to kind of walk you through a typical situation, you could have a price drop in a specific market. This could be competitive market forces, or it could, in more cases, it's more often that you find a mandatory price cut that's required, something along those lines. When that happens, you're faced with immediate repercussions that that action is going to have on the impact of that price change in other markets. So that when you look at when you look at the impact across those markets and when you look at it over time, there are a lot of uncertainties that you need to be dealing with. Now, you will have to use statistical simulations. There are deterministic approaches that you can take, but it informs you so much and not more than that. That's where we believe that simulations that account for this variability and maybe getting into Monte Carlo and some of these simulations that can really look at these variances and account for them within the model informs you to a very different level so that you can take decisions knowing fully well what is kind of the boundaries within which we can operate, as opposed to saying that this is what I expect to, that will happen. So I think there's a fundamental need for us to accommodate that within any of the decision making that happens in this space. So now, how do we deal with this? I mean, again, going back to the issue about the uncertainty and the complexity that we have in this marketplace, and particularly as it relates to global price management. One of the key areas that we have come across oftentimes when we talk to clients is, every company has access to some pricing data that they keep, whether that is in the form of some kind of an Excel spreadsheet, or they have dedicated databases and systems that are capable of handling this. But the bottom line is that the pricing information, and when I say pricing information, I'm really talking about from a strategy perspective, the list prices and the up-channel prices that we see in the marketplace. These prices oftentimes tend to be not maintained in real time or near real time, and the reason for that is obvious. It's not a price point that you're able to normally get out of your revenue management systems or elsewhere. It has its own rules and regulations in terms of how the margins work in every country. That tends to be very different. So the systems that are being used in most companies tend to be not up to date. And when you get a request from one of the countries, authorities in a country, an authority in a country asking for prices, saying I want prices from these 5 countries to be used in a reference pricing exercise, that's when the scrambling begins. And you really have to go back to the affiliates, revalidate your prices, come back and get all of this together, get into a certifiable set of prices that you can give it to that authority. That's oftentimes an issue we find at most pharma companies. Now, the other side of it is, now when you do have a request, or when you do have to model a change in the price, and you want to do some analytics, let's say you have a situation where one of the countries is requesting for a 5% drop in their prices, and you want to understand the implications of that. The fact that you don't have data that's real time is one of the issues. But an even bigger issue is, how do you now take that data and make it into a format that can be applied in a statistical or even a simple Excel model? That is always a challenge, and we've often seen companies struggling to kind of meet this objective within a certain deadline that they have, and 70% of the time required is actually in getting the data to a format that is then amenable to analysis, and that is obviously another challenge. And what we find is successful companies where they have addressed this is where they have been able to integrate these 3 components. So how do you make sure that your data is real-time, near real-time? The only way you can really do that is a tight integration between your data and your processes. So the very process that sets new prices, new deals that you put in place are captured within the database. That's clearly one of the ways. Now, how do you make sure that the analysis can be done in a way that doesn't take a whole lot of time in data cleaning, data preparation, and spend more time on qualitatively analyzing what you have, and spend on a higher order of analysis that you can turn out. The only way you can do that is to have an integrated approach where data from your database flows seamlessly into those analytical modules so that you can very quickly pull up that data, very quickly do the analysis. So that's really the value of integration. And I think that's what we're trying to emphasize here, that you need to be really thinking about integrating across data, processes, and the analytics components. And on top of this, again, it's needless to say that all of this need to come in together in a very user-friendly format where people can simulate various analysis or manage the processes or really report out of your data in a user-friendly way. So that's really what we think is, from an operational perspective, a way to really make your global price management effective. So moving over to the next slide, I just wanted to take up a couple of key areas that practitioners of global price management, they come across this very regular way, and there aren't easy ways of addressing these problems. So wanted to talk a little bit about launch sequencing, which is part of the overall launch planning process. Now, the launch planning is obviously a complex, very, very complex exercise. If you were to think in terms of, there are, oftentimes people think of it as saying, I'm just going to go with my highest priced country. I'm going to launch in the beginning. If it's a free price country, that's fine. And then I would, go through my EU5 countries in a pretty straightforward way, and then I'll start worrying about other countries as we get closer to those. The reality is that it's a lot more complex than that. And how do we solve the problem? If you were to go in and, let's say, a drastic approach would be to say, I'm going to work out every permutation and combination coming out of these mix of countries. I have 30 countries. I'm going to do 30 permutations and combinations, and then try to evaluate every one of those. That's a lot of work to do. When you're talking about 10 countries, 10 factorial, you're talking about 3.8 million combinations and permutations. So you don't really want to go down that path. So a number of different approaches have been adopted here by various practitioners. But what we think is that today, with the availability of data and the computational power, it doesn't prevent you from doing that many evaluations in a very quick fashion. And that's where we think today's tools should go to, being able to pick up, all of the potential, combinations that might work in the space and really give you a robust estimate of what is going to happen if I were to change this order from ABC to ACB, or make that to a larger list of countries, 10 countries, 20 countries. And that we think is key to being able to do some of these. Now, the goal, of course, is when it comes to launch sequencing, is at the end of the day, you are trying to maximize your your global revenue stream and come up with a scenario that gives that records a much higher net present value out of the future stream of revenue. But this may not be the case in all situations. You might have other considerations. Could be somewhat clinically driven considerations. There could be some reimbursement related, or they may be just plain the constraints that are imposed on you based on how long it takes in some countries to get it to the point where you may have some other approaches in mind of launching it to a commercial population that will be paying out of pocket prior to reimbursement. So there are a number of factors that is going to affect your launch sequencing optimization. But at the end of the day, what we believe is that this is a complex issue, but it can be broken down to the point I made earlier to smaller, manageable units that we can model, we can come up with, and then provide a tool that would make this decision-making a lot more robust. So just continuing on the thought in terms of the launch sequencing, what you see here is something that we have taken out that shows how different countries would be launching at different points. This is a result of a simulation that you're saying, but without having to pay too much attention on the schematic here, but it's a very complex interplay. We talked about the permutations and combinations, but just looking at some of the impact, the dependencies that we have to start modeling within this. So clearly, reference pricing is a very direct, dependency that we have to factor in. There are, obviously, countries are using complex sets of rules. They're using a different set of rules, whether, it could be one set of rule at the time of initial launch, it could be another set of rules when it comes to resetting the prices over time. So a number of those factors play in. There are also room for arbitrage when it comes to parallel trade and some of those. So price differentials would have an impact in terms of how your goods move within some of these markets, more so in some markets in Europe and here is what we find here in the U.S. Those become pretty important determinants of your overall launch sequence strategy. Now, and on top of some of these, add the other complexity that we talked about earlier, which is many of these are also, there is an uncertainty built around it. You have a rule, but it's not a straightforward rule. You have a time when some of this will happen, but that could be any point between point A and point B without a specific date. And so all of these things have pretty significant impact. And again, reinforcing the message that you really need to have a tool that can address all of these complexities and bring them together into something that can do a true optimization and come up with a launch sequence order and tell you what the payoff associated with that order is going to look like. So moving over to the next slide. Now going beyond the launch sequence side of it, which is complex enough, and we just provided you a very brief overview of some of the issues there without going into too much of the details there. But wanted to just go into another part of the life cycle, which is where most pharma companies spend a lot of time on. These are how do you manage your products that are in market and inline products, and you constantly need to be tweaking your pricing strategy. You need to be looking at strategies that are, that are maybe in the U.S. it's contracting. In some of these other markets, there are off-price, off-list price deals, whether they are tenders, whether they are, price volume agreements. There's all kinds of variations of the theme that starts to hit you once the product is an inline product. So now the question now is how do you start to model impact of some of those? Again, to recap on some of the things that we talked about earlier, there is obviously this is not something that we can claim to understand every bit of those dynamics and come up with saying, hey, here is the full impact down to every detail, but can obviously, if you provide a structure, within which you do the analysis, other things being equal, you can always say, my net difference on this is going to be in this range, and my scenario A is better than scenario B, and to a fairly accurate level, calculate the impact of some of those decisions. Now, when you look at the real-life situation that you face, now the product prices obviously need to be, are constantly under pressure, particularly in some of these markets, unlike the U.S. market, for example, where there are mandatory, legislatively mandated price changes. There are in rare cases where there is a competitor and you got to drop your prices. So there is a reimbursement rule change that forces you to change your prices. So all of these changes, once that happens in one of these markets for a variety of reasons, we may have to look at how do I now protect my volume within this market. Or maybe in some situations you may be able to grow your volume in that market by doing that. But those are the price-volume trade-off decisions that come up in every market that you have to make. Now, but what is important is to keep in mind that as you do this price drop, it not only affects your revenue within that country, but it also starts to have impact on other markets. And that could be due to a number of factors. It could just be reference pricing impact. It could be some of the parallel trade and arbitrage that kicks in has a negative impact on your bottom line. It could be that competitors tend to respond differently, which might also create some impact on your overall product revenues. So there's, but it's important to realize that this is impact of what you do is going to affect other markets. In a spatial sense, it is going to go across to other markets. From a timeline perspective, from a time horizon, it is also going to affect your longer-term product lifecycle revenues. That is another factor that you've got to keep in mind. Now, the typical reference pricing impact is a price erosion over time. It's interesting that if you were to model price erosion, if you were to model reference pricing in some of these markets, and if you just assume a steady state, and if you there is really no steady state because it would continuously erode over time, and even if you were not making any price changes, it could potentially, as various countries repeat the process, the price has a natural erosion that's associated with reference pricing. So every time you do come in and do a price change, you have to understand that there is a baseline eroding value, and on top of that, I need to understand what kind of the additional impact hit I'm going to take as a result of making this price change. So that's really what some of the modeling will help you to do. So very quickly, you should be able to create the business case and then be able to assess what impact is that going to have across all markets. We oftentimes have to take it to the next stage. It's one thing to say that I understand the impact of my price drop on the other markets. The next question is, so what do I do about it, right? And going over to the next slide, and I'll come to that in a little bit later. So to understand, once the price drop happens, how do we try to then understand what are some of the options available to me? There are ways of understanding, that maybe you could go and potentially do something in one of these markets that can stop that erosion at some point. And there are ways to address that from a modeling perspective, and we'll be talking about that briefly when I come to later slide. But now talking about some of the basic requirements in inline price management. We already talked about the need for that integrated view across database, your processes or your governance processes and analytics, which becomes extremely critical in inline price management because of you often don't have too much of time to respond to requests, and you need to be constantly on your toes in terms of making sure that that you have the latest information, you are able to constantly monitor the impact. So that goes without saying. But going beyond that, you have to be maintaining the reference pricing rules. These change over time, and that becomes a very critical component of whatever simulations you do. Now, these rules are also not, it's not a straightforward rule that you can often apply. They tend to have a certain level of uncertainty around it. So abstractions would become a natural need for you to build into the system. So while some countries might say I'm going to use an average or I'm going to use a minimum rule, they oftentimes this can be somewhat creative. And as we go through more of this practice, the way reference rules are changing today, we should not be surprised if we come across more creative rules. And I'm sure somebody will come up with a square root function someday. But again, that's aside. But the reality is that we should be thinking about the complexities and being able to capture whatever rules are there into rules that we can actually use in the model. The informal reference pricing rules is the other area that we need to be looking at. Oftentimes, when you look at countries, they have reference rules that may or may not apply in some cases. They might decide to say, we may or may not apply the rule this time. It could be that they may not give you a specific date. They might say, I'm going to apply this in over a period of any time during the quarter. It could be that there is an inordinate delay between the time when we do the exercise to the time when that decision becomes available in the public domain in a way that other countries can pick up that price. So the number of those kinds of uncertainties that will also have to be modeled in. And so probabilistic approaches to some of these become an important part of how we model these. So just to give you an idea, again, this is just to visualize some of the things that we've been talking about here. Now, what you see here is a reference map, so to speak. We have pulled this out of one of our applications where we display this information. Now, you can see the country in the Belgium that's shown as a referencing country. Some of these rules may not be the most up-to-date rules, but I just wanted to pick this up as an example. But so the referencing country, and it shows which are the countries that are referenced by the referencing country in this case. Now, we have used some color coding here just to kind of give you an idea of out of those countries that are referenced, which of them follow what rule. And so the ones that follow an average rule for their referencing going to the next level, they have been shaded in green. The ones that use a minimum rule, they have been shaded in red. And the ones that follow a rule in between that takes some kind of an average at the lowest 3, at the lowest 2, those have been given in that yellow ochre shade. So the idea here is some visualization. Now, when you start to look at some of these situations that come up, it's also important that we get a visual picture of what is going on. And in a similar way, it's also very important to see what are the current price differentials. Even before you get into a simulation, the first part of what you do should be to look at, okay, I'm getting a price change request from Belgium in this case, or one of the countries from Spain, let's say, and then what is the impact of this going to be? You could trace it both ways and look at that. You could look at the price differentials. What is the differential that exists in the marketplace today? All of this allows you to get a visual picture of what is likely to happen. And then once you get past the point, allows you to come up with a scenario that you can create and do a simulation. And we typically would address that scenario creation in either start off with a deterministic kind of a run to get a sense of what directionally what is likely to happen. And once we have a good sense of how that looks like, then go into more of a Monte Carlo-based simulation. So that's kind of the step approach to how we would typically address this. That I just wanted to highlight through this. This is just a starting view, but obviously that can be very useful in coming up with realistic scenarios. I talked to you about, earlier on, mentioned about when you take a price change in one country, understanding the impact on other countries. Now, to be able to track that impact, now what you're seeing here is an index. So if you're looking at a total revenue that across all the markets that started at 100, which is the bar at the left that you see here, to the end of end of the period, that revenue comes down to 68.11, just to give you an example. And it's a waterfall that shows you which countries are contributing how much to that drop. And there's some of this, it's not very clear, but when you have a full view of this graph, it also breaks down each country and gives you how much of that change that country is contributing to is a result of a price change that is happening to that country, which is a policy-initiated price change, versus how much of that is a reference price-induced change. So, and then what this allows you to do is what we call this as leverage analytics. What this allows you to do now is I can now say if I'm able to go ahead and make a change in one of these countries that are going to be affected downstream, I could potentially have an impact on the net the outcome of whatever I'm trying to do. So it allows you a way to look at not just what's the impact of a price change that I do in one of the markets, but understand what is it that I can now do in other countries that are falling in that along the way. So that's one of the things that we wanted to share with you here as well. And this again is, although it looks like a pretty straightforward representation, there's quite a bit of complex algorithms that go behind in terms of calculating how that can be partitioned across various markets. So that's what you're seeing here. So going to the next, at this point, I just wanted to, I think we've talked to you about lifecycle price management and at least covering some of the key issues around launch sequencing and inline price management. And I wanted to kind of put out some of these typical questions that we get, and not going through all of these, but these get down to a certain level of details that for if you are somebody who sits down and who's asked to create a model that does this, these are the issues that you will be facing. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there. And the reason we are able to say that is when we went through development of the application, we thought through these very carefully. And so some of the issues that you come up with are obviously you have you have things like nonlinear pricing. So it's an issue that oftentimes it comes up. I have not listed it here, but the question is that you could have one same product in two different packs, and the pricing on a per tablet basis is not linear. And then how do you kind of make that enter your overall equation? How do you track a combination? If you have dealing with a combination product, how does that enter the equation? What happens if you have multiple currency exchange rates? If you have some countries that use a different exchange rate, which is a proprietary or customized exchange rate, they want to take a 6-month rolling average versus others who want to take something else. How do you address those? So there are a number of issues that come up, and some of them are pretty straightforward. The transformations is one of the things that I'm sure many of you have come across. How do I, it's not so much from a simulation perspective, but from a reporting perspective. If I'm looking at my product and I'm comparing it to my competitor's product, my product is an injectable, my competitor's is an oral product. How do I do those transformations so that I can very quickly look at my cost per cycle or my monthly cost or my annual cost or per day cost, or whatever you feel is the appropriate unit of measure? How do I very quickly look at those and be able to compare them And so all those kinds of things obviously become key details, if you will, that you will need to address as you start thinking about operationally managing global price. So with that, I just wanted to very briefly talk to you about how we at Alliance have tried to address this. We went back to some of the foundational issues that we talked about the need to integrate database, the processes, the analytics, and we built a system grounds up that that really integrates all of these components into one seamless application. So we have a solution that does global price management. We also have a data service that has been built, which is really tracking competitive prices, and we track well over 75 markets worldwide today, and those prices from competitors are integrated into the price right system. So, so when you look at when you look at the application, you're not only able to look at your own internal prices, but you can actually compare units of measured, adjusted prices for your product versus your competitor's product. So we have been able to build a very powerful integrated application to address all of these and more. In fact, there are a number of components that we have not addressed today, but I hope this presentation has given everybody some insights into some of the the more bigger picture issues that we covered earlier, and some of the the operational as well as some of the smaller details that come up to be big issues. I hope we've been able to give you a complete overview of all of those. So with that, I'm going to stop at this point in time, and we'll be happy to take any questions at this point. Okay, so what we would like to do is we have provided you the information here. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. There's also, if you feel that any of you would need more information, we'll be happy to come in and do a more detailed presentation, and we'll be happy to do that. So please do reach out to info@alseg.com, and we'll be happy to come in and speak to you in more detail if there's a need for that. Or otherwise, you can email us questions. We'll be happy to respond. So with that, I want to thank everybody.